On the topic of Afghanistan now, I want to bring in Michael Shoebridge. He's the Director of Defence Strategy and National Security at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Good to talk to you again, Michael. First up, tell us about some of the nation states who are going to use this vacuum now in Afghanistan to advance their interests. And I'm thinking particularly of China and of Pakistan.
Well, Chris, I'm not sure it is a vacuum. One of the reasons that we lost the war in Afghanistan is it's a very densely packed power network inside Afghanistan. And as you rightly observed, for centuries, it has defeated various external powers. Anyone that thinks they've got an easy path in dealing with Afghan warlords and the Taliban is in for a nasty surprise. I think we can see China wanting to reap the resources out of Afghanistan, but do so in a really narrow, mercantile way. There's no win-win gift there for the Afghan population.
Can I just jump in there? Is that Russia's main interest as well?
Yeah, well, I think Russia's bigger interest is not having instability and violence spill into its territories out of Afghanistan. And that idea that it might be a haven for violent actors is something that it will be right on the radar of Iran, Russia, China, Pakistan, and India. So this has become a much bigger shared problem than just being able to blame the Americans and NATO. And that is something that really will get the attention of Beijing and Moscow.
Now, what are the main concerns for Australia then? I've talked about it becoming a terrorist haven again, and I think that's probably inevitable. Groups, the Sunni Islamists from the Middle East and North Africa might see it as a nice place to base operations again. We don't really know. We'll have to see what unfolds. But is that Australia's main concern, the rise of global terrorism from that base? Or is it those more strategic issues you've just referred to?
I think in a lot of ways, those more strategic issues play to Australia's favour because they distract a whole bunch of adverse actors, and notably the Russians and the Chinese. So that's not bad news. I think the idea that it could be a place for violent terrorists to organise is an abiding risk, and that's going to focus Australian minds along with our partners and allies. But I think about some of the other consequences, the startup of people outflows, refugee outflows. That probably is a bigger concern for us because we've had that pipeline run into Australia before. But the pandemic and everyone's tighter border control is a bit of a mitigator there.
Now, what about the fortunes of people in Afghanistan? I know that wasn't the initial reason we went in there, although we ended up being involved in what was a nation-building affair. But we know about the plights of women in Afghanistan, but also of some of the ethnic minorities, particularly the Hazara communities. Do we expect to hear terrible things happening to them in the future?
I think we will. I think you got it right when you said anyone who expects the Taliban to have changed is making a naive mistake. I don't think Joe Biden expected that. I think he expected the fall of the Afghan government, just not as fast as it has occurred. And I think he made a ruthless decision to shift American priorities to the systemic challenge of China. But we should be prepared for the Taliban rule to be a brutal one, and for that to drive people to leave Afghanistan. And that's a problem that we need to face head on. And it's one about our refugee policies and our management of displaced people. We won't be alone in that.
Well, it's another reason that it's very easy, and it's kind of it's an easy argument to make. People are against this neocon approach, delivering peace and stability, even democracy to other countries. But in the end, when the world is so connected now, when any country falls apart, we all suffer consequences. Whether it's terrorism, whether, as you say, it's refugee implications, whether it's the need for ongoing aid. I mean, this is not over. Australia's relationship with Afghanistan and the resultant consequences is not over by a long shot.
No, and it shouldn't be, although I think one of the major issues will be those other powers we've talked about who are now going to have to engage more in Afghanistan don't want to put Humpty Dumpty back together again as a functioning state. They want to use it for their own purposes, and resource extraction is one of those. That's going to make Afghanistan's problems worse, not better.
Very, very pessimistic outlook. Thanks for joining us, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Michael Shoebridge there from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute.